Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. And Alexis de Tocqueville once described America as the land of associations. So tonight we'll be talking about one of those, the Arab American Bar Association. We have as our guest John Breen, the president, and the incoming president of the association, and Naderh Elrabadi, the secretary. So, Naderh, John, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Well, let's start with some pretty basic stuff. What is a bar association, and why does it exist at all? John?
Well, it's interesting you start with de Tocqueville, right? That's the appropriate place to start, right? Because he said that's part of the genius of America, right? That there's not simply the state. There's all these intermediate institutions between the state and the individual, and that's how we get things done, right? That's how people who have a common purpose or something in common, they come together, right? And pursue their ideas and live out their life. A bar association, typically serves a number of purposes. It serves as an opportunity for lawyers to meet one another, right? There is a social dimension to it.
Networking, professional and social.
Well, social, I was going to say just as social, but then yes, the networking aspect of it, right? So that you can learn about different expertise. Different lawyers have different expertises, right? And you may not be able to sort of handle a particular client matter. You are introduced to a lawyer who can, so you share that with them. So networking on a professional level, right? And then as a way of mentoring newer members of the profession, including those who aren't yet formally members, like law students, right? Who are in the process of becoming lawyers. And then also it's a method or a mechanism of providing continuing legal education, which in Illinois is required, right? Once you're admitted to the bar, you're also required to maintain that, to learn about the law and its developments.
Well, because the law changes constantly.
The law does change, yes.
We have to have something for those legislators down in Springfield to keep doing, right? They need to keep changing the
right.
laws.
That's right. They seem to do a pretty good job at that too. So those are the basic ideas behind sort of any bar association, and that would be true of not only our bar, but of a bar like the Chicago Bar Association, or even a national organization like the American Bar Association, which is based here in Chicago. So what do those people have in common? Like in the Chicago Bar, right? What you have in common is, well, you're all attorneys in the city. You practice in the city of Chicago. The same thing with the Illinois Bar Association. You're all Illinois lawyers. Well, what do we have in common? Well, we have our Arab background in common. And so we're not alone in that regard. There are numerous other ethnic bar associations. There's the Justinian Society of Lawyers, which is Italian, people of Italian background. There's the Hellenic Bar Association, folks who are Greek. There's the Decalogue Society of Lawyers, which is a Jewish bar association. There are many, many organizations like that. And
so what is the advantage? And Naderh, let me come to you. So the Arab American Bar Association, what is the advantage of that association as opposed to just being part of the Chicago Bar Association or the Illinois Bar or all of them, the American Bar Association? And I would assume you can be members of all of these bar associations simultaneously, right?
Yes, you can. Many of our members, if not all, have some Arab descent, whether it's a small percentage or a large. For me, I'm a Jordanian Christian Arab, and it's important to me to have a bar association to be a part of that recognizes the specific group of ethnicity that I came from. And I've been a member since I was a student back in 2000. And like Professor Breen said, it's a network of attorneys and law students and thankfully judges. We have 2 judges in our bar association who have, who provide access to lawyers and law students into the legal system where we'd otherwise not have that.
In fact, one of them, Judge William Haddad, has been on this show a couple of times, so he's an old friend of the show.
That's correct. So. And Judge Haddad he serves such a monumental role in the bar association. So we have access as attorneys to be part of the Chicago Bar and the Illinois State Bar and the American Bar Association, but to have something that we can call our own means a lot to incoming attorneys.
So what do you get out of it, especially as someone who's relatively recently in the field, a 2000 graduate? So what do you get out of the Arab American Bar Association specifically that you wouldn't get out of the Chicago Bar?
Well, I'm a 2004 graduate.
I'm sorry, 2004.
That's okay,
right.
because they let us, participate as students. But for me, I'm able to have a position where people in my community feel that they can have access to the legal field. So someone in the Jordanian community, small business owners or people who otherwise don't feel that they have access to the courts can come to me to sort of say, okay, what are my rights and where can I go to have a voice when I have a legal issue?
So is it
that's
common
important.
for someone who might need a lawyer to contact a bar association first and say, look, I need something and I don't even know where to turn?
It's very common. So a lot of people will feel more comfortable saying, let me ask an Arab attorney, let me use my language, or contact someone that might know my background first. So we're a referral source, as Professor Breen mentioned, where community members, other attorneys will say, hey, I have this legal issue. Is there someone that can help me, with a discrimination complaint? Or is there someone that can help me start a small business? So I think to have a smaller subgroup within a larger group of attorneys, I think means a lot to community members, residents of Chicago, and also to Arab attorneys. So I think that's what benefit it serves to me as an Arab attorney.
And so, John, with that wonderfully Arab name of John Breen, do you find that you're contacted a lot by members of the Arab community to say, look, I'm in need of something. Can you help me out?
I do get referrals. I mean, I think it's come up. I'm a professor. I teach full time. I'm a professor at Loyola University, Chicago School of Law. So I'm not in full-time practice anymore. I do a little consulting, usually in the ethics field, but no. So when a person like that would contact me, I would refer them to someone else in the bar association. So yeah, I'd say that the Arab bar, like all the ethnic bars, are a little more intimate, right? I mean, there are upwards or close to 90,000 attorneys in the state of Illinois, and about 40,000 of which are in Cook County. Now, not all of them are members of the Cook County Bar or the Chicago Bar Association, but many of them are, right? Those are large organizations. This is a smaller group. We're about 150 or so members, and so people know each other better. And when we want to have a program on something, it's a smaller group, so you can go to and say, hey, I think this is an issue that people would be interested in. We ought to have a CLE, a continuing legal education session on this. And so it has that benefit.
So what kind of issues do you see coming before you? I mean, you talked about discrimination cases, and certainly since the 9/11 attacks, I think the environment in America has gone back and forth to a couple of extremes. So do you find that there are still residual effects of that incident in American history? How's that?
I think, if I could speak to that just for a second, I mean, I think it's important that you bring that up. One of the reasons why we founded the organization in the first place.
And you're one of the founding members.
I'm one of the
right?
founding members who founded the organization in 1990. I was a young associate at Sidley & Austin, which is a large firm in downtown in the Loop at the time. Was the caricature of Arab Americans that was really prevalent, of Arabs and of Arab Americans that was really prevalent in American society, which is that Arabs are not civilized, right?
They're terrorists.
They're terrorists. They're all terrorists. They're bloodthirsty terrorists. And our bar is made up of people whose background is drawn from all over the Middle East. Naderh said, she's Jordanian. There's many members of our organization who are Palestinian, Lebanese. I'm Lebanese. Syrian, Egyptian, so from all the countries that make up the Middle East. We're really a pan-Arab organization. And yet we all have something in common, right? We all experienced the love of an Arab home and the values that are present in that home, which includes education.
So what would be different there? I mean, having grown up in an Irish Catholic home, what would be when you talk about the advantages of growing up in an Arab home, so how would that look? What do you get from that helps you in your career, that makes you somehow who you are?
Well, I'd say in part, I mean, like any sort of Arab or any ethnic identity, right? Part of it is the history of where you come from and what that's about, right? I mean, culture is a complex thing, but history is part of that. Religion is part of that, and that's on my mother's side, we're Maronite Catholics.
And yes, and by the way, both of you are Christians, right? And
Christian.
That's correct.
I think a common misperception is that all Arabs are Muslim.
Actually, a majority of Arab Americans are Christian. It's like around 60%. Now, the more recent waves of immigration are overwhelmingly, well, not exclusively, but strongly Muslim. And our bar association, it's really a wonderful organization in that regard. We're about half Muslim, half Christian. And so we're not a religious organization, we're not political, we're not a religious organization, we're a bar association. So dedicated to those things we talked about before, about networking and client referrals and continuing education and then the social dimension. But it's really kind of provided an informal forum for interreligious dialogue too. I mean, I've learned a lot about the Muslim faith from my friends in the bar association.
So, Naderh, let me come back to you. So, do you agree with John on the idea of the Arab values that you learn through your family and at home? And if so, how does that affect your outlook and your approach to your profession?
Well, growing up in a Jordanian household, my parents came to America in the mid-'70s, and they instilled education and family and religion, and that was something that I carried with me throughout my schooling and my practice. And earlier you discussed the benefit of having a bar, and it's an association of people that are just like me, people that grew up like me, people that have the same cultural beliefs and the same pride in being an Arab and showcasing the benefits of being Arab and having that hospitality and the pride that we grew up with, and I always was proud to have that voice, you can say. And recently, as part of the Mayor Rahm Emanuel's program, there's an ongoing program with the Commission on Human Relations. So I was inducted as a commissioner. So we hear discrimination complaints from communities, people who have had direct impact, directly been impacted by discrimination.
And do you find that yourself in your own practice? Have you experienced discrimination, particularly in the wake of the 9/11 attacks?
Well, I was still in school during the 9/11 incident, but there were, fears.
So I mean, even in school, you could have felt that, right?
Correct. I wasn't actively practicing, but even during, just everyday things that you would take for granted, you could tell people looked at you in a different way, and I felt like I had a role. I had to educate people. And it's a tragic time, and we're still feeling the impacts of it. And the bar actually helped to promote.
Do you feel that changing, either one, John, Naderh, either one? Do you feel that the environment particularly in Chicago, let's start here because this is where we are, is changing, and that people are finally getting past this kind of extreme prejudice that came out after 9/11? I
mean, in some of the practice that I've done, much of it earlier before I started practicing in plaintiff's injury and plaintiff's litigation at the office I'm in now, the Santilli Law Group, people have had trouble with immigration and business ownership. There were direct impacts. I like to think that things are moving in the right direction. We're not talking about it as much, but I think on a smaller scale, people are still experiencing the negative effects of 9/11. And what I always tell what was always discussed in my family is never to lose that pride that you have in being Arab, and never to shy away from where you came from. And the broader community sees that Arabs are professionals, Arabs are educated, Arabs are
normal people. They're your neighbors,
normal people,
right?
Just like you and me. Right. I think that it helps to kind of eradicate some of those fears and negative impacts of tragedy such as 9/11.
And in particular, as lawyers, right? I mean, that again, many of us. I mean, I'm third generation Arab American, so some of us are a more recent vintage. But regardless of when our family came to this country, they all came to this country, right, for the values to experience the freedom that every immigrant country, every immigrant group comes to America to experience, right? Freedom, and something I think that's particularly important to us as attorneys, the rule of law, right, which makes freedom possible, real, robust freedom possible.
And I want to ask you too, we've talked about this a little bit before the show, but I think this is really interesting that you being of Irish descent as well.
Yes, my father immigrated from Ireland, and from a place in Ireland that was not accustomed to the rule of law. He's from Belfast, from the Falls Road, Belfast.
Very difficult place.
Yes, yes.
But we talked a little bit about the process of assimilation that all ethnic groups go through, and the Irish themselves, 100 years ago, went through a very difficult assimilation period where they were considered subhuman and uneducable, and just criminals by genetic nature, even though they didn't talk in those terms then. Right. And it wasn't really until John F. Kennedy became president that the Irish were seen as someone who could be, oh, well, they're just like you and me. They can serve as president and not be, well, at the time they were afraid that he would take orders from Rome, from the Pope in Rome. Right. And so today we have Barack Obama has just been reelected, and as you look at the breakdown of the electorate, what you see is that the coalition that Obama put together for the reelection was largely minorities, which collectively added up to a majority for him. And do we see that shifting, and do we think that this kind of assimilation period that we talked about, that the Irish went through it, the Italians went through it, almost every ethnic group came in and sadly went through this period of being looked down upon before establishing themselves. Does the reelection of an African American change that equation in any way? Do we think that assimilation patterns might change for the better?
That's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about it, but I would say this, just to kind of go back to something you mentioned before about 9/11. Our Bar Association was very active in sort of responding to that. We put out a statement that was published in the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin right after the event, and I can say I think that everyone in the Bar Association was ashamed on a certain level of that act, because these are people with whom we share something in common, right? A common ethnic background. And they were responsible for this terrible atrocity committed against fellow Americans. And at the same time, members of our community did experience a significant backlash. There were a number of churches there were incidents of vandalism and mosques as well, and I think many incidents of individual prejudice. And the bar was active in trying to respond to that. We were in contact with Fitzgerald, I'm forgetting, Patrick Fitzgerald, right. Thank you, the former U.S. Attorney, or head of the U.S. Attorney's Office here, and we're in contact with Senator Durbin's office, had a meeting with him to make this sort of public, right, to sort of stand with one another, but to show that we had the support of public officials too, right?
Now, what I thought was interesting about that reaction, and I just want to point out that a few years earlier, when the federal building was blown up by two white American guys,
right,
there was none of that backlash against young white American males, right? And so it's the same level of, I mean, it was...
Or Christianity.
Or Christianity, right? I mean, it wasn't the same level of destructiveness, but,
right.
But the idea was the same. It was a major terrorist attack that blew up a building and killed a lot of people. And yet, the reaction, once people found out, oh, it wasn't those crazy Arabs or those crazy Muslims or those crazy whomever, there was like, oh, well, I guess it's not really terrorism because it's one of us. Does that strike you as odd?
I didn't really have that reaction at the time. I mean, and I do think there was a lot of criticism, and rightly so, of some of the extremist groups, right?
The militias.
The militias that the people like Timothy McVeigh belong to. But I was going to say, it has been over 10 years now since 9/11. I do think things have changed, but the people's perception of ethnic groups, especially when they're rather small. I mean, there's, I think, less than 4 million Arab Americans in the United States as a whole. So we're a relatively sort of discrete group, and people have their preconceived notions about what an Arab is. That takes time to change. I think it has changed, and it certainly, we aren't experiencing quite the prejudice the overt acts of prejudice that were present in the wake of 9/11. But we're not there. I mean, you brought up the subject of, have things changed? You have an African American, elected to the nation's highest office again. I don't think we've got to the point where the nation's prepared to elect someone named Haddad or Hussein or Elrabadi.
But actually, we have a president named Hussein.
Well, we do, right? Although his middle
It's
name
his
was sort
middle
of
name, right.
covert too, right? And not
his opponents made sure it wasn't
not
covert.
not
They made a
advertised
point of
that
bringing
much, right?
And I think it's important for people to know that if there is an act of terrorism that's committed by a group that's predominantly of a certain ethnicity or religion, it's a small fraction of our community. I believe, I think that people like to put certain ethnicities in a box, and they forget to highlight the positive things about.
Well, and I come back to the blowing up the Murrah Farrell building, Timothy McVeigh, good Irish Catholic name, right? And I didn't find any prejudice or anybody looking at me as though, a name like McDermott. No one looked at me as a terrorist who was going to blow up a federal building, even though an Irish guy did it. And that, I think, may be part of the evolution of acceptance of various ethnic groups. And so I would think even at some point it might not even be necessary to have an Arab American Bar Association. I mean, it might be an ideal to aim for, however long it would take, where it wouldn't matter. And so it would just be, well, you're just another American.
Well, I mean, if we didn't have the Arab American Bar, a lot of non-attorneys may not know where to go for resources. And I feel like having a subgroup of attorneys that form collectively, I think that it's important because we're there for networking and for education.
I'm not advocating that it be disbanded.
Oh no, and
I see the value.
No.
Right.
Well, it helps communities at large to know that they have somewhere to go where there are attorneys who care about issues that could affect them directly.
And I think it points out, I mean, that you want to be accepted, but you don't want to be assimilated to the point where you lose your identity, right? And having an association like this is a way of preserving our identity, where we come together and we share what we have in common, and are very happy to share it with everyone else, right? It's not culture, Arab identity, Arab culture is not meant to sort of exclude other people. There's something very rich there that we're happy to share with others.
And you mentioned a tradition of hospitality as well, right? So what are the kinds of things that you think that the Arab community can, or the Arab American community, can bring to the rest of the society here? What kinds of values, like hospitality? What kinds of things do you try to, what image do you try to project to say, look, these are all the good things that go on in this community?
Well, for me, the way I was raised, there was always a sense of family and hospitality and education, which are things that most cultures and families will have. But to have a subgroup or of people like my parents who came here from Jordan, it was important for them to have my siblings and I to have that sense of community and hospitality. And even on various days where we'd have to, share our culture with other classmates or things like that, I think we were welcome. There wasn't any discrimination that I felt, in school or anything like that. But I think it was important to have those values persist so that people don't just see the negative side, sometimes, which is often portrayed in the media. So that's something that was important to my family.
So as a newly elected officer of the association, what are some of the goals that you have? What are some of the things you'd like to do? And by the way, how long is your term? Is it a year or is it 2 years? Or?
2 years.
2-year term? So you just found that out?
I had to look to the president. I wasn't sure my commitment
How long
was.
am I there? So what are some of the things that you look forward to being able to do in your term now as a secretary?
Well,
recording secretary?
I'm trying to reach out to various law schools because the school that I attended, John Marshall, has the largest growing Arab population of students. So reaching out to various law schools in Chicago to basically make the Bar Association larger. We'll still have the Chicago Bar and the larger bars at large, but to have an ethnic-based group where we can all unite, I think that's very important. And if we can have maybe forums where issues that are hotly contested in the community, we've discussed some of them today, can be discussed where both sides are equally portrayed, and also just to be a place where people can be educated, people can have resources and access to the courts. That's something that's important to me.
John, you're the president. Where do you hope to take the organization?
Well, I think one of the goals I have during my term is one of the foundational goals of the organization, and that is to be the face of the Arab American community in the wider legal profession. So by simply existing, we kind of do that on a certain level, but then making our presence as widely known as it can. So by collaborating with some other bar associations and hosting events. And I think also in terms of expanding our membership, not only among law students and those who are on their path to becoming lawyers, but also among those Arab lawyers that are already out there that aren't yet members, or who are members and haven't been as active as we'd like them to be.
So what kind of messages would you like to bring to the group? I mean, in your 2 years, I mean, is there a last impression you'd like to make, some sort of change in thinking maybe, or if that's not even warranted, then just sort of a motivational direction maybe even for the organization that you would like to leave as your legacy when you're done?
Well, I think it's important for us as an organization that we remain sort of not political, even though, you know, there are many of us who have sort of strong political beliefs and probably across the spectrum, but you know, many of those beliefs are tied to the politics of the Middle East. But I think it's important as a bar association that not be a dominant theme, right? There are many other Arab organizations that carry on that sort of work, and that's really not our goal. But as someone who teaches legal ethics all the time, I think that's and I've conducted CLE classes for our bar association this year and prior to my becoming president. I think it's important, right, because there are some people out there that still have suspicions about Arab Americans that they know, that when they consult with an Arab American who's an attorney, that they're consulting with someone who is believes in professionalism and practices at the highest level of ethical practice.
Agreed? We have about 30 seconds. So
Oh, it's absolutely.
I'm going to give you the last word.
Oh, thank you. Well, as I mentioned throughout, I value for people in my community to believe they have access, to know they have access to a jury trial if they're injured,
Well,
to
if
know
they have
that they
someone
have
who can
access.
represent them.
And they do. And just not to be afraid to ask for help and not to be ashamed if you have a legal issue. And we're here for that. And it's basically...
Well, thank you very much for being here tonight for us
much.
and for our audience.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks
So,
for having
Naderh,
us.
John, thank you so much for being here.
We really
Thank you, Mr.
appreciate
McDermott.
it.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us once again on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can find us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19, or see us on the web at publicperspective.tv. Till next time, thank you and good night.